The rain had a funny way of making everything look cleaner, except that night. That night, it only made the marble steps slicker, the shame sharper, and the betrayal louder. I still remember the hiss of the champagne cork that never made it to her glass, and the laughter that followed her out like hounds let off a leash. What those 6 women didn't know was that someone was watching. Someone who wouldn't let this go unanswered. They say some storms come to clear the path, but others arrive to show you who was never meant to walk it with you. And if that idea makes sense to you already, go ahead and like this video or hit subscribe, because this story is exactly the kind of poetic justice you won't want to miss. It started, as many stories of quiet cruelty do, on a night meant to celebrate kindness. The Langley Club's annual charity gala was supposed to be a black-tie celebration of philanthropy, but underneath the glittering chandeliers and crystal centerpieces, it was a battlefield of whispers and veiled smiles. I watched it unfold from a distance, not realizing at the time that I was witnessing the first strike in a silent war. Sophia Carter was radiant when she arrived, wearing that wine-red Dior gown like she'd been born into it, even though everyone in that room knew she hadn't. She wasn't one of them, not really. That fact alone was like a grain of sand in the silk shoes of the Langley Six, the self-declared queens of Boston society. Elena Whitmore led them, as she always did, with her frosty smile and the kind of laugh that always arrived half a second too late to be sincere. They never liked Sophia, not because she'd done anything wrong, but because she didn't belong in their neatly curated lives. She hadn't gone to Choate or been escorted to debutante balls. She married into wealth, and worse, she married well. Her husband, Dorian Ashcroft, wasn't some legacy trust fund baby. He was a billionaire made from code and caffeine, the kind of man these women's husbands owed favors to, even if they resented it. Sophia had something they couldn't fake. She had come from nothing, and still shined brighter than all their diamonds combined. That made her dangerous. So when the opportunity arose, they didn't hesitate. It started with whispers, innocent questions asked just loud enough to be heard. "Did you know she used to wait tables in Nevada?" One of them murmured. "I heard she only got into that gala because Dorian bought the venue 2 years ago," said another. I don't know if they knew I was listening. Maybe they didn't care. That's the thing about powerful people pretending to be perfect. They never imagine someone might be keeping score. By dessert, the gossip had turned into orchestrated embarrassment. Elena raised a toast, smiling directly at Sophia across the table. "To women who rise," she said sweetly, "however they got here." A few chuckles, then silence. Sophia smiled back, unflinching. I saw the flicker of pain in her eyes, but she didn't let it show. That strength, the ability to sit still while people chipped at your dignity with diamond-studded words, was why I admired her long before I ever spoke to her. The final blow came just after the auction ended. Security, dressed in all-black suits, approached her discreetly. I could hear Elena's voice from where I stood, low but purposeful. "We're terribly sorry, but there's been a misunderstanding with the guest list." I watched, stunned, as they escorted Sophia out the main entrance in front of the entire ballroom, rain pounding on the stained glass awnings. No coat, no ride, no explanation, just the steady drum of rain swallowing her footsteps. Not one of them followed her. Not one. And that's when I saw her pause, just beyond the doors, her breath clouding in the cold. She didn't cry. She didn't curse. She just stood there for a long moment, then pulled out her phone. I only caught one part of what she whispered into the receiver before the wind carried it away. "They think I'm alone." But she wasn't. I didn't know until much later, but Dorian had tried to call her that night. He left her a message, short, clipped, but unmistakably furious. "Call me if they act up. I'll burn that place to the ground." And I knew he meant it. The Langley Six had just made a mistake they couldn't buy their way out of. They hadn't just embarrassed Sophia. They'd triggered something much bigger than their crystal-clinking empire could handle. And from the look on her face as she disappeared into the night, I could tell she wasn't going to stop him. Because this time, she didn't have to fight. Someone else would handle the fire. And I, for one, was going to watch them burn. The first ripple came quietly. No fireworks, no headlines. Just a whisper that swept through Boston's financial circles like an ill wind. Ashcroft Ventures had pulled its $12 million sponsorship from the Langley Club's Beneath the Magnolia initiative. Officially, there was no explanation. Unofficially, everyone knew. You don't humiliate the wife of Dorian Ashcroft and expect the world to keep spinning your way. Within 48 hours, 3 board members resigned, 1 gala was postponed indefinitely, and Elena Whitmore's charity received a politely worded but very public withdrawal of funding from 4 of its biggest corporate donors. That's when the calls started, panicked, desperate, and unanswered. Sophia didn't say a word. Not to the press, not to her so-called friends, and not even to Dorian. Not yet. She didn't have to. The message had been delivered. You crossed the wrong woman. I saw Elena 2 days later at a boutique opening in the Back Bay, wearing sunglasses indoors and sipping something that looked stronger than champagne. She looked like someone who'd just realized the elevator she was riding up didn't belong to her. Meanwhile, Sophia, she was radiant. Not just in looks, but in presence. She walked into the same event 5 minutes later, with a grace that made everyone stand a little straighter. No red Dior gown this time. She wore navy slacks and a white silk blouse like armor. And behind her, 2 women I'd seen mocked by the Langley Six in previous years. Women from the outside. Women with hyphenated names and hard-earned wealth. They weren't just with her, they followed her. Power had shifted, and Boston could feel it. But the real reckoning hadn't begun yet. That came a week later, when invitations went out for a new gala, the Carter Collective Benefit Ball, posted not at the Langley Club, but at the Boston Museum of Art. Not a single member of the Langley Six was on the planning committee. But their names? Oh, their names were everywhere, just not in the way they were used to. An exposé had dropped the night before the event. Anonymous sources. Leaked audio. Emails dripping with elitism and casual cruelty. The worst of them belonged to Elena. She's like Charity with contour. One line read, referring to Sophia. Another, I'll bet she thinks Aldi is a designer. The timing wasn't accidental. Everyone knew Dorian had the reach to scrub it. Instead, it dropped like a guillotine. And when the night of the gala arrived, the contrast couldn't have been more stunning. The museum was packed. CEOs, artists, community leaders, teachers, single mothers, an entire cross-section of Boston, finally in the same room without being talked about. Sophia opened the evening not with a speech, but with a story. When I was 19, she said, standing beneath a blown glass chandelier, I cleaned rooms at a roadside motel and took night classes. No one invited me to things like this, but I showed up anyway. And that's the heart of this new foundation, to help others show up anyway. The applause was thunderous. I scanned the crowd and caught a glimpse of Elena, tucked near the back, face drawn tight as a violin string. She had shown up after all, probably trying to save face. But when Sophia approached her table later in the night and said, loud enough for the nearby donors to hear, "Don't worry, Elena. You'll find a new cause to pretend to care about." The entire row went silent. That was it. No screaming. No scene. Just humiliation served on a cold, glittering platter. And Dorian? He didn't even attend the event. He stayed behind the curtain, letting Sophia claim every inch of that spotlight. It wasn't about vengeance for him anymore. It was about watching her become the force she'd always been. The Langley Six had underestimated a woman who survived on grit before she ever had grace. And now, they were learning what it felt like to be locked out in the cold while she rewrote the guest list from the inside. The snow that evening fell like grace, soft, steady, and silent, blanketing Boston in a stillness that felt earned. From the rooftop terrace of the Boston Museum of Art, I watched as Sophia Carter Ashcroft stood beside the woman she had once been exiled by. Only this time the tables were so completely turned, they weren't even in the same room. They were on different planets. It had been 3 months since that unforgettable night at the Langley Club, when 6 elite women thought they could define who belonged in their world by escorting one of the most quietly formidable women I've ever met into the cold. Since then, the Carter Collective had become more than a foundation. It had become a phenomenon. The media called it a reclamation of power. Donors hailed it as philanthropy with teeth. But those of us who saw it from the inside knew it was something more honest. A movement born from humiliation, lit by dignity, and fueled by women who were done waiting for approval. Sophia had redefined Boston's social landscape not by storming the gates, but by building her own castle and making sure every woman who'd ever been shut out had a key. That night, the holiday benefit was unlike anything I'd ever attended. No rigid hierarchy, no hushed corners of judgment. Artists mingled with executives. Baristas laughed with bankers. The food was catered by a non-profit culinary school, and instead of silent auctions for rare wine, there were scholarships raffled for teen moms to attend college. But it wasn't just the attendees who changed. It was the host. Sophia stood in the middle of it all, not commanding attention, but simply earning it. Dorian hovered nearby, smiling from the sidelines, exactly where he liked to be when she stepped into her power. He didn't need to say anything. The world knew this man had turned an empire against itself for her. But he hadn't needed to humiliate anyone. He'd only needed to reveal who they already were. Elena was there, too, albeit awkwardly. No entourage, no champagne glass in hand. Her carefully sculpted life had cracked under the weight of public scrutiny. Her name now whispered with more pity than admiration. She approached Sophia during the second hour of the evening, when the room was warm and buzzing and no one was watching too closely. I saw them speak, briefly, quietly. Sophia listened, nodded once, and placed a hand gently on Elena's arm. Not vindictive, not smug, just resolute. Whatever was said in that moment, I knew this. Sophia had given her what she had never been given that night in the rain, a measure of grace. And that was the real revenge, wasn't it? Not the loss of reputation, not the collapse of privilege, but being met with kindness from the woman you tried to break. As the night wore on, laughter spilled out onto the terrace where I stood, watching the city glow beneath a dusting of snow. Dorian eventually joined Sophia at the edge of the dance floor, slipping an arm around her waist as a child. One of the scholarship recipient's daughters tugged at her hand to show her the mural she'd painted earlier that day. "It's called Second Chances," the girl said, beaming. "Do you like it?" Sophia crouched down beside her, her voice low but warm. "Sweetheart, I love it. It's the best thing I've seen all night." And as she stood again, taking Dorian's hand and gazing out at the room she'd filled with new stories, new power, and new rules, it became clear to me. This wasn't just a return. It was a homecoming. Not to the places that once rejected her, but to a truth that had always been hers. That your value isn't in how well you mimic the elite, but in how boldly you refuse to. They had kicked her out into the rain that night believing she'd shrink. But all they did was water the roots of something unstoppable. And now that she'd bloomed, she didn't need to knock on anyone's door ever again. She'd built her own, wide open, with a welcome mat that read, "For everyone they said didn't belong."